Hi, welcome to the Dr. Shelley Meyer podcast and YouTube channel and the Women in Medicine Be the Change podcast. I am here with Dr. Amelia Bueche today, who has a very interesting background with lots of different things that she's done both in medicine and outside of medicine. So I'm going to let her tell you a little bit more about that. And we're going to talk about what she's doing now, which is really exciting. So welcome, Dr. Bueche. It's so nice to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about your unique path, like how you started out in medicine, what kind of things you did? I know you did a lot of training and then some other stuff outside of medicine. Tell us a little bit about that. And then I also want to touch on, any kind of burnout you experience, because we all have our own story. And I think the more we share it, the less alone we feel. And the more those who are experiencing burnout might feel they have options. So go ahead and let us know your past and your individual story.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. I think stories are such a fascinating way to connect and to see ourselves and see opportunities. So for me, I was one of those who wanted to be a doctor early on, but I wanted to be a veterinarian first. And then I thought, well,
me too.
They can't really communicate with me. And I thought I want to be able to have consent from my patients for their treatment. So I switched to people, and I didn't totally know what that meant. And in high school, I had the opportunity to work in a clinic where there was an MD and a DO, actually happened to be husband and wife. And it was the first time I even knew, right? There were different ways to be a doctor. And when I investigated osteopathic medicine, it just made sense to me. Like, of course, right? These align with how I understand, health and the human body. And I happen to live in a state where there's an MD and a DO school partnered at Michigan State. And so I went and applied to that one school, was in class with my MD colleagues and had the added bonus of osteopathic manipulation in our lab, and then integrating that philosophy into everything that we did. And so my vision, once I learned about it, was to really be kind of an old school osteopathic physician. And I thought that meant in family medicine, kind of the cradle to grave medicine and see all people for all issues. But when I got to residency, it didn't quite match up. My expectation, what was happening, didn't really feel how I expected it to feel. And actually, about halfway through that year, I went to my DME at the time and said, this has been great, but I think I'm going to go and be a trainer and, do a triathlon full time. And thank you very much. And he thankfully had some of the wisdom to say, well, maybe let's pause for a moment and talk about maybe this isn't the right fit, but it doesn't mean, right, you have to leave medicine entirely. And that's kind of some foreshadowing for how I've engaged throughout the process. And we had the opportunity at our institution to start a new program in neuromusculoskeletal and osteopathic manipulative medicine. And it was kind of a last moment thing. I said, okay, if we can do that, I'll stay, knowing it takes a lot to get a new program up and running. And we were about a week away from the deadline for applying, but we've made it happen kind of as a team effort. We put that forward, and it did feel more like the medicine I expected to practice. So I got to spend more time with my patients. I got to use my hands. I always loved surgery, but I didn't love the lifestyle of surgery. And so this felt like a way I could engage with anatomy, but in a non-invasive way. And that felt really good. And I ended up kind of matriculating to being the program director, which spoke to my kind of administrative and organizational leadership side. And then, as you mentioned, kind of burnout happened. It felt like I kind of hit the glass ceilings and a lot of the margins. And I was working all the time, and I had 3 little kids, and it just seemed like something had to give. And so a lot gave, and we actually moved 3,000 miles across the country, and I went into solo private practice. So working at a major, massive healthcare organization with lots of partners and teaching and academia, and then to just me in this little clinic with a little water fountain outside, a couple days a week, seeing a few patients. And that was really a year to tune in and tap into what I wanted to do and who I was. And along the way there, I had the opportunity to open a gym, and that was a lifelong dream. So I got to bring back, right, that kind of 6 months into internship year person to be a trainer. And the gym to me was really, again, an extension of my practice of medicine. I was bringing health in community, using fitness as a tool, but also showing people that they had the inherent capacity to heal, to do great things, that they had their own wisdom. And that felt really good. And there are a whole bunch of twos and fro's in there because of wildfire smoke and coming back to my home state. And ultimately, in the pandemic, our office closed at the time where I was living in Oregon on a PPE preservation order. So we were considered kind of ancillary care, not frontline providers. And so there was this moment, March 16th, 2020, and I walked home from clinic and I thought, I'm not going back. And I didn't know totally what that meant. But I'd had a whole bunch of different ideas. I actually had a website and a podcast, but I never had links for people to actually sign up for any programs. And I had serendipitously enrolled in coach training at the same time. And I had done that months before because you had to, wait for the class to start. And it just so happened it was a week later after the pandemic began that I had my first coach training class. And they said to us, you don't give people the answers, they have them within, and you help them to see all that they can do. And I thought, this is amazing, because that's how I practice medicine. But it didn't always fit in medicine because we are meant to diagnose, right? And the physician does have a key part in the treatment and in the cure. And none of that really sat well with me. And I thought, right, I think I've been coaching all along, and I just didn't know that was what we were calling it. And it just so happened, I looked at my website and I thought, well, you have these ideas. Now let's turn them into a program where people can actually engage and show up. And you can use this lens of coaching to help it make sense. And I did. And I ran a program, open access. So I had about 15 people from all across the country, 15 physicians of all different specialties and locations and stages of life. And I saw them in this room together, and they had common challenges, right? All those different demographics, they still had common challenges. They were able to support one another and come together. I thought this is really bringing health to medicine. And from there, it's grown into a wider scale, institutional-based program. And I'm still currently in a clinical pause. I don't know for how long or what that means, but I still feel like I'm really practicing medicine just in a new way and on a different scale. And I get to partner with physician colleagues from all across the country to make this possible. And that's kind of been the long and the short journey to here.
Yeah, that's quite the journey. It's really interesting. And I love how you followed your passion. I think so many of us get stuck and don't think we can do all these different things that you've done, and a lot of other doctors I'm talking to have done. So what do you think, what made you have the courage or the drive or whatever to make those changes? And what do you think keeps other people from not doing that?
Yeah, I think having looked at this and all those different iterations is that I'm willing to give something a go before I have it all put in place, and so we might think in the physician world that we identify as type A. I really don't. And, we could talk about
I don't either.
Black and white of those, dynamics. But even in residency, we literally built that ship as we were, flying it, sailing it, where we had to, write the application and then put the curriculum together as we were going. And some could think, well, that's very haphazard, but at the same time, we made it work. And similarly for being in solo private practice, I really didn't know what I was doing, right? But you kind of figure it out as you go and trust yourself that you're probably going to get it wrong, but that's okay. And it's going to help you to get it right the next time. And similarly with the gym, right? Let's just see, what's available here. And so that willingness to, step into something that hasn't been done and to know you don't have all the answers, but being willing to try, I think is the key feature in all of those stages of my life that's allowed me to continue moving forward.
I agree. I think it's making that leap, with changing, being from an employed position to maybe being your own boss. There's never a perfect time, just like having kids. There's never a perfect time for that. If you keep waiting for that ideal plan where everything is mapped out and how everything's going to happen, you're never going to make that change because it's very unpredictable. But there's excitement in that, and there's challenge in that, and there's reward in that. There's so much that you can get from following your passions and doing your own thing. And you do have a lot of ups and downs, right? Owning your own business.
Totally. Yeah, that was not smooth sailing, but we get to where we get, and we get to decide whether or not that's a problem, a failure, whatever those language words we might use in there.
Yeah. I like to think of it as a challenge, a hurdle, a mountain to climb, right?
An opportunity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So tell us about what the name of your group is now, your company, how that's structured, what your day-to-day looks like now.
Yeah, absolutely. So my signature talk, I'm a member of the EntreMD Business School, and we have to kind of come up with who and how we are. And it's never one thing, which might be apparent through the course of that story. And so my parent company is called This Osteopathic Life because I still really do feel grounded in those osteopathic principles. Yeah. And they're not just for DOs, they're not just for patients. It's really kind of cornerstones and guideposts for how I live my life and offer that out to my patients and my family and my clients and my fellow coaches with whom I work. So that's really the overarching umbrella. Coaching for institutions is that version of our business that really takes the programs to the institutional level. So we are working both with the systemic challenges, that are a part of burnout, 80% of burnout, and supporting individuals who participate in those programs. And that's where I really get to lean into my collaborative nature. I have a team of about 80 physicians trained as coaches who are in and out of these programs working with me. And then also Live Inconceivable. So my gym was called originally CrossFit Inconceivable, then Inconceivable Fitness. And again, making that more than just a fitness space, live inconceivable. It's kind of my playful side, and it really is themed off of The Princess Bride. I just actually wrapped a 4-week program talking about self-love in there. And so I think it's so important to, be all of you wherever you are. And so those are kind of my 3 arms of how I exist in the business space.
I didn't know you still had the gym. I got lost in what happened with that.
I don't still have the gym, but when it closed, when the physical structure closed, that energy, right, needed to go somewhere. Gotcha. And so it pivoted into this theme of living conceivable. So I do teach virtual workouts when I run the program. It's just kind of taking the energy, because again, it was always meant to be more, right, than simply a place you go to exercise, but to really tap into your potential. So that's been kind of a creative outlet for me in this time.
There are 3 different kind of entities that you have going on. Wow. Yeah,
it's really different faces, of the same idea. The concept is always really, your own health and your inner potential, and how do we access that? And what I found is sometimes we need different languages and dialects and, color palettes, that really attract us in. And so offering that up brings in a different audience, but still to those same core purpose of who and how am I, and how can I best support myself?
Well, that's great to have all those different faces of it. So you're working with physicians all over the country, or?
Absolutely.
Locally?
Yeah. We're in institutions coast to coast. And actually my physician coaches who work with me are all across the country and even beyond. We have some international coaches as well. And we work with students and resident physicians and attending level faculty physicians. And those programs all have a little bit different flavor. As you imagine, there's a different pace at those different times of education, training, and practice. But we bring forward programs that combine teaching and group coaching and individual coaching, so we can tap into different learning styles and also build connection, as well as create those kind of private and sacred spaces for physicians to have the time to really just talk about themselves. We don't have that opportunity very much to really dive in, and for an hour, right, you get just to say whatever it is that's coming up and speak your need and offer that opportunity forward.
Yeah, I recognize that is something that we all need, because when I was in residency, that wasn't, you got to speak up when you had the answer to the question they were asking you, or came up with the diagnosis for that case, but there was nothing emotional or nothing, personal about it, really. I think it's fascinating.
And what we found,
go ahead.
It's that having an external consultancy, so coaching for institutions, brings physicians from all over the country in different programs, but you're not working with someone within your own institution, and that little bit level of space, especially at the learner level, makes it so it feels safer. You can really share without that concern of repercussions, or I'm going to be graded by this person in the next moment. And absolutely, internal programs have a lot of merit. There's a lot of value in there too. But we found that degree of separation has actually been really great in helping them to build connection and build trust and begin to see themselves in a new way.
Okay, well, let me kind of try to get this straight in my head. So it's like you were working with residents. They're not working through their residency program. It's separate.
Well, our coaches are not of their residency program. So
I see what you're saying. Okay.
An institution would contract with Coaching for Institutions to bring in a program, and we would have coaches who might be of the same specialty, or they might be, in a similar geographic region, but they are not faculty of that program. And so they can come in with a little bit more of a neutral approach. There's no bias. Again, there's no grading potential that's there.
Right.
We find that really opens up the relationship in a different way. And we also do work to help them build their internal resources so that they can, have coaching type behaviors and actions within the program, but that level of anonymity and space can really be useful when bringing those programs forward.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think it's wonderful that residency programs are doing this. What a lovely way to set up your residents for future success. And of course, I love that institutions are doing this too, because maybe that's going to shift, how our institutions work and how we feel valued and how we set boundaries and all of that as physicians, and then avoid burnout, hopefully in the future. So it's such a domino effect, I think that has. So it's great what you're doing. Well, what kind of words of wisdom or advice would you have to share for someone that's on the edge, or a physician that's like, okay, I am not happy where I am at? Like I know this, you can't sum this up to like 2 points or anything like that, but what kind of pearls would you have to share?
First I would say, know that you're not alone. That's the number one thing that comes forward in our programs. People sit down in this room and they assume everybody else has it together and feels fine, is making it all work, and they realize they are not. And that's not to say it's okay or they want to keep on this path where so many of us are struggling or having these challenges, but know that it's not you, right? So there are opportunities you have to make a shift, and burnout, like we said, is 80% systemic and it's 20% individual. And that's not a blame or a shame statistic. That's an opportunity, like we've talked about. So you have 20% of this you can totally control. And that can come through, like you said, setting boundaries, literally changing your schedule, making things work better for you, but also in your approach. We talked from the very beginning here about expectations, right? I thought residency was going to look one way and it didn't. And I could stay there and, feel the discomfort of it, or say, you know what, this is not working for me. And I think there's either a better way, either that's, athletic training or a different specialty. So you're allowed to acknowledge that things aren't quite right, to speak your need, to find those advocates and allies who can help you. And that you do have a choice in every moment. Edith Eger is one of my favorite authors. I don't know if you read her books, The Gift and the Choice, and she is a Holocaust survivor. And like Viktor Frankl, right? We always have the opportunity to choose, even in the most difficult and egregious of situations. So people can't take from you, right, your thoughts and your perspective. And again, not condoning, systems that are traumatic or abusive or, problematic within which we work, but know that even in those toughest situations, you always have room to choose. And from that space, you can make decisions in a very different way and begin to advocate for yourself in a very different way.
Lovely. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Bueche, for joining me today. I love what you're doing. How can people find out more? I know you have different umbrellas at your, companies, but how do they find out more about what you're doing?
Yes. coachingforinstitutions.com, on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and thisosteopathiclife.com. And I also do have a podcast by that name.
Okay, great. I will link all of that in the show notes in the description. So I really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much.